he doesn't understand the appeal of smoking weed. You know, why would someone want to do this? And someone said, well, it amplifies your personality. And he says, yes, but what if you're an asshole? So that's what social media is. You have to be conscious of the fact that if you're an asshole, it's going to be amplified across multiple networks. Not all intersect and do all things we talk about. So be yourself and try not to be an asshole. You know, really is what it comes down to it. And don't be fake, because within this whole medium, people can spot a fake pretty quickly. So you have to be yourself. And so as you're doing little silly things like, you know, coming up with hats and signature items, and or you know, whatever it is, just the way that you provide value. And I you know, really, you know, my personality is more about my passion for this space, and I like to visualize things, and I freely give that away. So you have to be authentic in the way that you do things, because people will understand. They'll see your motives pretty quickly. So everybody know who this is, this guy? Okay, Gary Vaynerchuk. He talks about personal branding as sort of like a gold rush. That at some point it's going to end, and you really have to, you know, make a push and you know, get your claim, just like any gold rush. And you know, I think he's partially correct in the sense of urgency. I think what it comes down to is that, you know, aside from social networks, you know, everybody here Google someone they know, right? You get a pretty good snapshot of what that person's done, where they've worked, if they've written anything, you know, their blogs come up. And so what it comes down to is that if you're going to get Googled, or even use a social search, and you're going to come up in those results, you want to kind of have some level of influence on those. In order to do that, it kind of goes back to all those things I mentioned. You actually have to have a bit of strategy. So when it comes down to how you're presented on Facebook, or how you act on your blog, or how you're using any of these things, all these things show up. They all leave a trail, and we have to be conscious of those things. So really that's what it comes down to is, you know, to go back to what I said earlier, a brand is a gut feeling. It's someone else's gut feeling about you. And you can't really control that, but you can influence it. And that's the key. So if you're just out there doing all these things and you don't have a strategy and you're just kind of reacting to everything, the chances of you influencing how you come across is less effective. So that's what Brand 2.0 is. If you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Yeah.
I don't mind asking questions. I'd like to know what your suggestions are for somebody who is representing a brand. And New Husky with Cision, everybody can start following me tomorrow or tonight. But what your suggestions are for somebody who's representing a brand or a company, you know, a global corporation, and as everything is becoming so integrated, you know, friend feed and Facebook and everything, I struggle with keeping, you know, my Facebook very separate and personal, or, you know, more individual, and then crossing over to talking about, you know, working for a company like that. What are your thoughts on that integration, and when it's right to keep it separate, or just advice in general? And how
yeah. So when is it right for you to kind of co-brand versus totally keeping it separate?
Yes.
More or less?
Yes.
When you're representing the brand, I mean, you're basically in a way acting as a steward, right? You are representing them, and so like for whenever I speak, even in something like this, to some degree, I'm always cognizant of how I represent my company. This is a little bit. This particular one is a little bit more my own time, and so I can take a little bit more leeway with it. If it's a professional event, it's always I work for critical mass first and foremost. You know, kind of start there. So you have to have a bit of a strategy. Now on my blog, I say, you know, kind of disclaimer, personal blog, right? And then when I write for my company's blog, it's a company material. But there's always going to be some type of connection, and it depends on sort of the level of your profile and how visible you are. So I think you really have to just basically come up with your strategy and figure out what you want to sort of separate and where do they kind of work together. And then once you figure out, okay, if I'm blogging for my company, or I'm representing them, or I'm Twittering on their behalf, how am I going to do that? And then that gets into transparency, which is probably the #1 thing, is how transparent you can be about it. But you have to decide for yourself, what is your strategy? Like, where are you going to keep it personal? Like on my blog, it's kind of like, you know, there's mentions of the company and I'm transparent about it, but I consider that to be my place. Does that help?
So there's always a conversation about brands, brands participating in social networks. Should they participate as brands, or should they participate as individuals working? You know, would people rather see? And I feel like there's people that come down on either side of the issue sometimes, and they make good arguments. Should, like, let's say you work at, you know, I don't know if you work at Dunkin' Donuts, like Dunkin' Donuts is on Twitter, or Starbucks. And they are the brand, but then they also do, I mean, people, you know, they act in a personable manner, but there are some brands that are definitely brands. There's not really a personality there.
Yeah.
There's, you know, I mean, I know how I feel. How do you feel?
I think I came up with a new word. Brandividuals. Which I'll actually, I think if I were to bet 3 to 4 years from now, probably the more successful examples will be individuals representing a brand, and whether it's the logo that you see in the avatar, you're going to know who that person is. It's not just going to be blank. You never know who the person is behind it. If I had to put my money on it, I would say that the successful ones, you're going to know who that person is behind it, and the really successful ones are going to figure out, when that person leaves the company, how they're going to deal with it, how they replace it. That came up today at Blogwell, actually, for Home Depot. Yeah, Home Depot. Because the person who kickstarted off their Twitter, you know, has a pretty good following, and people are loyal, and if she leaves, I mean, she is that, but you know, long term they'll have that figured out. If she does leave, then another personality needs to come and take that. So I'm kind of, but you see, some people will say, no, brand shouldn't be on it, and I'm kind of thinking, no, it's going to be a combination of, it's just not going to be the way it's been done in the past. You know, it used to be just Coke, and you never knew about the people who work behind Coke, and now it can be Coke, and it's John who works for Coke, and you know, he's going to help you do something. I don't know.
Do you have any thoughts or particular strategies for how to manage your personal brand when you're going through either a professional, or really my question is about going through a life change, a significant life change? Like, my question is because I'm leaving corporate life to become a stay-at-home mother.
Okay.
So I still have, you know, all this experience as a worker,
Right.
But I don't really want to continue that as my brand anymore. So how do I manage this transition?
You have just more flexibility. I think if you are like myself, I mean, I don't know, I think I take a lot of liberties with it, but you always have to be more conscious when you're in the corporate world, because you're always going to have coworkers. Kind of, if you start to build this, they're kind of like, wait, are you representing us? That question always comes up, and it becomes a delicate dance. Your dance is less delicate, and you can kind of do whatever you want. I mean, in this presentation, you should go through all those things and figure out what it is that you want to project, and figure out how you want to add value, and how you want to interact with people, and you really kind of have carte blanche over it. I don't think you have tons of limitations if you are working. It's just that you have to put more effort in striking that balance. You're not going to have to really worry about that as much. And if you want to start a business, like, you know, selling some kind of niche product, that's where having a personal brand comes in handy.
Matthew Baldwin with City Search.
Hello, Matthew.
I'm working with a lot of small, mid-sized businesses, like, for example, jewelers, where their name is their business.
Right.
So their first and last name is their business, and that's their brand. And they're starting to align and float a little with social networking. So Facebook, even Twitter, are there do's and don'ts they should do? Because their goal is really to promote their product.
They're small business?
Small business.
They should actually have a leg up. Because what they do is jewelry.
Yeah.
So do the people know who's behind the counter?
Yes.
Do that.
But is it too?
Operate like that in the social space, because that's sort of what it's like. These bigger companies are acting like small ones.
But to do Twitter messages like 20% off, or if they want it more sales.
Well, you know what they can do now?
That's their bottom line goal, but should they?
What they can do is buy areas, since they're local, they can find out who's talking about jewelry,
Right.
and they can identify, like in the Chicago area, and
We
then.
can't hear the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So the question is, small business, jeweler business, how would he advise them how to use social media? And they're more inclined to offer what discounts?
The do's and don'ts.